Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be taking a look at a potentially new and powerful build for Outlaw rogues inside of Mythic Pluses. This is probably the most fun build that I've been able to play so far, and we'll be taking a look at what this build is like and showing you a bit how to play it. It is the Outlaw Rogue Killing Spree build inside of Mythic Pluses. Killing Spree is a fun ability, and I remember playing with Killing Spree back when it was still Combat Rogue, and it's been, I feel like, iconic to the spec. Right now in Shadowlands, it doesn't really do an incredible amounts of damage like it used to back in the day, and I really feel like it should be part of the Outlaw Rogue toolkit just because it's such a cool looking ability. And it works really well inside of dungeons, surprisingly well, and it synergizes together with Vanish. And there's only one reason we'll be using Vanish as a rogue. I think you guys already know where this video is going. So today we'll be talking about the 100% critical strike, Killing Spree, Mythic Plus build for Outlaw rogues, and talking about if it's good and if it's worth playing. This build is a ton of fun, first of all. It's actually very enjoyable, and Killing Spree just feels so right for Outlaw that I think a lot of you guys might like it if you give it a go. Before we get into the video, I do want to give credit to JCP though. We looked at some of his stream footage and stream VODs because the build was actually brought to me up by one of the viewers during one of the live streams. So we peeked over to an Outlaw rogue that was actually playing this build. I don't know if JCP made the build or if that's just something he plays regularly and just simply excels at it, if it's his favorite build or whatever it may be. So I don't know if, you know, if he's the creator of the build, but just wanted to give him credit because we did look through some of his footage to extrapolate how to play this build properly, look at some of the polls to see what he does and try to see if we can mimic it in our gameplay to figure out how this build works. Outlaw Rogue is a great spec for Mythic Pluses. However, it is not the greatest when it comes to damage. Other classes are better simply because they're not capped on AoE. While Outlaw Rogue sits in a 5 target cap, like a lot of other classes, there are classes like Mages that don't have any caps, Shadow Priest, Boomkins, Marksman Hunters. There's plenty of specs out there that simply do a lot of damage because they don't have as many constraints when it comes to AoE damage. Technically, Outlaw does have a talent called Blade Rush that doesn't have cap on AoE, but it never really felt like a strong ability. It was always good for single target, maybe a bit of cleave. I guess like a casual Blade Rush in a 8, 10, 20 pack was kind of cool, but it never really felt super strong. So this build actually tries something different. It tries, instead of trying to expand the damage range of the enemies that we can hit to higher with Blade Rush, instead it decides to forget about that and get really good at that 5 target cap. Killing Spree ends up being a far better ability for it. It's just a lot of damage compacted in 2 seconds to all the enemies. With Blade Flurry, it's 100% damage increase to nearest enemies, and Blade Flurry adds into the extra damage, so it's kind of like Killing Spree will do a ton of damage, then Blade Flurry itself, Blade Flurry is even more damage out, and it's a really nice burst that lines up together very well with Vanish. With Vanish, Vanish gives you stealth, gives you ambushes, but also gives you ability to use that critical strike legendary Master Assassin. We made way too many videos at this point with Master Assassin, and I feel like we'll continue making videos on how broken Master Assassin is, or how their builds are Master Assassin, or why Master Assassin Legendary is amazing, until Blizzard either nerfs it, removes it, or we are in another expansion. So let's go over the build. You want to run these talents. Some of the things that are important here is, first of all, Killing Spree. You kind of need it. It's, you know, the whole build is based around it. The rest of the talents are more or less standard, but you can make an adjustment in the row where I take Mark for Death. Mark for Death is another finisher for you and combo points, and gives you a lot of cooldown reduction because you can use it pretty rapidly. If you use it on an enemy that's about to die and the enemy dies, Mark for Death is reset, so you can use all those 5 combo points to get cooldowns back super quickly. You can also synergize pretty well during your Master Assassin 100% burst windows, which is going to be quite a bit of damage for AoE or single target. If you don't like this one, you can always play with Vigor. I think it'll be fine if you're a new player and you just are getting used to the energy regeneration rate for Outlaw. But if you are someone who's been playing the rogue for a while, Mark for Death is a solid choice. You should definitely go for it and start learning to play around it in order to gain maximum value. Another thing that helps a ton is a conduit or count the odds. You definitely want to be running this on your soulbind. It just ends up giving you so many more buffs throughout the run, so many more opportunities for you to get cooldown reduction buffs of True Bearing, so that helps a ton. And of course, crafting Master Assassin Legendary is kind of the bread and butter of this build. And that's about all you really need in order to craft this build. The rest of the gear and stuff, I would mostly prioritize versatility in your gear, because you're not really going to need crit as Outlaw. Haste Versa are pretty good stats, so if you PvP a lot, you could pick up a couple of those from the PvP vendor. Hopping back to the build, it's pretty simple. Basically, every time you have your Vanish and your Killing Spree available, you want to use them together for a very powerful 100% critical strike while Blade Flare is active Killing Spree combo with cooldown reduction. So with cooldown reduction that Outlaw naturally brings, where when you spend common points into finishers, you get CDR back on majority of abilities, Killing Spree and Vanish included. Combined with this legendary, you have actually a way shorter burst window than every 2 minutes. In fact, it can be something like 1.5 on average, maybe 1 minute, could be even shorter if you get certain buffs like your True Bearing, the buff that gives you a lot of cooldown reduction for your vanishes as well as for your killing sprees. So in my opener, there are a couple things that I want to accomplish every time I open up on a group of enemies. You want to make sure you have a Roll the Bones buff active. I usually try to open up with an ambush, get my Blade Flare up and running, and get a Slice and Dice rolling as soon as I can. Then pull a little bit of energy, or maybe even press Adrenaline Rush just to start letting that energy flow. Go into a Vanish ambush, making sure that I'm not overdrawn on common points, making sure that I have ample time for my Blade Flurry, because after that ambush, I might have a chance to gain a buff, and then I go with the Killing Spree. And then that Killing Spree only lasts 2 seconds. So as long as I have a Blade Flurry active for those 2 seconds, that's best. If you can end at about maximum combo points with this setup, then you can go for a Dispatch. And if you're running Mark for Death for this setup, which I would be, Mark for Death, Dispatch would be the next go. From there, you're just trying to do your proper normal playstyle of Outlaw. If you're hitting more than one target, try to maintain Blade Flurry as often as you can. Don't let your Roll the Bones buffs fall off. Don't let your Slice and Dice fall off. Build common points up until 4 or 5, and then use a Between the Eyes if it's off cooldown, or Dispatch as the filler. And then kind of rinse and repeat until you have you another Killing Spree combo, which will be shorter than every 2 minutes, especially if you get really lucky with certain buffs. And from my experience of playing this playstyle, you kind of end up using your cooldowns constantly. Now, there's a little bit of an argument to save your CDs for big trash packs, or maybe when a boss goes into a phase where they take more damage. And trying to line up your cooldowns for that stuff can be tricky, but has some uses. So for certain dungeons, I would say holding cooldowns is not the worst idea, but my general rule of thumb, especially during dungeon packs, trash packs, use your cooldowns as often as you can. Cooldown reduction is a very forgiving mechanic for Outlaw. You get your cooldowns back very rapidly, and if you're sitting on your CDs and not using them, that's you not doing any damage. So the more often you can use your cooldowns, the better. Again, there are some bosses, there are some adds, where there's moments where they take a lot of damage, and a Vanish 100% Killing Spree to a boss or an add that takes extra damage is a lot of bursts. But if you are uncertain or you're new to Rogue, the best advice I have for you is just try to keep your offensive cooldowns on CD, unless maybe you're just hitting one single mob and you're about to go into a trash pack with 5 mobs. Then you should probably save your CDs for the trash pack itself. With Prideful Add, I even started doing my burst during the Pride Add, because I feel like by the time I do it, I'm going to go through so many common points and so many finishers by then, and my cooldowns are basically going to be back up for the next trash pack, and I'll have the Prideful buff. It just ends up being a very, very forgiving playstyle where you don't need to save your CDs like a Fire Mage with Combustion, using it for very key moments, but rather you want to use it as often as you can so you can fit as many of those big burst uses inside of your dungeon run. And that's going to be the basic gist of this playstyle. I've been enjoying it a lot in Mythic Pluses. It's very, very fun. Killing Spree is a very cool ability, and playing an Outlaw spec that's usually not a burst spec, having some kind of burst, even in single target or AoE, is generally nice. I've noticed that I'm doing way more damage with this build than with previous builds. So this one I think has some potential to it. Definitely you should give it a go if you're playing Outlaw Rogue next time you're doing your Mythic Pluses and you want to try something new. Maybe you wanted to make Killing Spree work again. All you need is a Master Assassin Legendary. And most of you guys playing Rogues, you're probably PvPing with that Legendary anyway, so it should be pretty easy to craft. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this build. Let me know what you think about this build in the comments below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another one.